Welcome to Clever Orbits. We bring graduate-level literary analysis and fanatic-level charisma and passion to analysis and engagement with science fiction that we love. We have so far been analyzing Star Trek The Next Generation and a little bit of now so far Star Trek Voyager. I am your host, Louis Brantmeyer, and I've got my co-hosts on the line.
Richard Petrell. Richard Petrell.
And Tyler Brantmeyer.
Tyler Brantmeyer. Tyler Brantmeyer is, in fact, contrary to the sound of his voice, not from New York or thereabouts, in case anybody was wondering.
I've seen too many movies.
Tyler Brantmeyer. You should listen to his voicemail. It sounds like he's from New York. Anyway, today, I know, before he objects, today we are talking about, damn it, Tyler. Today we are talking about Star Trek Voyager and specifically Scorpion Part 1, which I think is one of the coolest episodes of that series. Just initial impressions. Who would agree with that?
I was not that impressed.
Oh, well, so you weren't there when it was first aired. That's probably your problem.
Could be.
Yeah.
Yeah, we seemed to be impressed at the time.
I think by the time we're done, Richard's naysaying will be discontinued. However, I'm sure he's got a lot of good things to say. So, yeah, Star Trek Voyager Scorpion Part 1 is the final episode, the finale of season number 3. And I think it's really where the show hit its stride. Of course, this is a common theme for the first and second seasons of most shows to be just utter crap. And kind of stumbling in the darkness, hoping to find something meaningful. Kind of like the years before reason alights upon a child. And then season 3 is kind of, let there be light. And season 4 is like, all right, we are good. We know who we are. We know how we serve the general public. And we're going to keep doing that and doing it well. Until eventually season 7 when things kind of slow down, except for DS9. DS9, I think, was still pretty far up there at season 7. And Voyager was actually okay at season 7. But anyway, we're going to just experiment this time and skip the summary, though we're going to try to keep our comments roughly chronological. Richard, I'd love to hear your initial impressions, like in more detail. Why were you not impressed?
Well, this episode seems to be all built around the notion of hype that there's something stronger than the Borg. And then it turns out it's a bunch of CGI, praying mantises. And the Borg are cool because they're both unstoppable and they're like an interesting foil to the Federation. But the CGI praying mantises are just like, what do we know about them? Like their motto is the weak will be destroyed or something.
The weak shall perish, which I think is very
perish.
Specifically chosen.
Just, it's just all about the explosions.
Well, so I'll stop you right there. The philosophy behind Species 8472 is not fleshed out on the show. I will agree with you that when you look at just this episode and the next episode, and then I think there's either one or two other episodes where they show up. Actually, there's just two, Prey and In the Flesh, from season 4 and season 5. Their philosophy is not very well articulated. And yet, when it comes to anything that goes wrong in the show or that is left incomplete, like, say, season 7 of Deep Space Nine, the Temporal Cold War. Actually, usually, I'm going to amend this. Usually I like to say whatever gets done wrong is done better in the books. However, I'm going to amend that to say whatever isn't done well in the show is usually done better by Christopher Bennett in books, specifically, because he's got a great appreciation. Yeah, exactly. He's got a great appreciation for the canon of Star Trek. He's got a way of tying it all together. So he takes things and he adds stuff that basically is mostly a kind of deduction from what is already happening that weaves it together in a really entertaining way. And he did that with Species 8472. There's a book from the Myriad Universes series, which examines alternate timelines, called Places of Exile. And in that book, we find out that for some reason our universe is special, and it splits off into multiple timelines more often than other universes do. And of course, fluidic space, which we'll jump ahead to Scorpion Part 2, we find out is the origin. It's where Species 8472 comes from. And it's a very distinct kind of universe. It's made of this semi-organic fluid. We find out that they, in the novel, we find out they are basically the groundskeepers, which is a nice little play on the fact that one of them appears as groundskeeper Boothby, who was a friend of Picard's in Next Gen, in the 5th season episode, In the Flesh. So, like, their whole idea is that there's a kind of biological purity to their space, number one. And number two, there's a sum of the mass in that space that has to do with keeping it together. And they basically are like immune cells for that space. And their whole idea is that the weaker cells will perish so that the whole can survive. And so there are like these multiple timelines that arise around their intersection with our universe. And what happens is they send people into our universe, and multiple versions of the same Species 8472 character come back. And so there's like a mismatch, and too many 8472s coming back. And so they're like, well, this is screwing everything up. This is really messing with not just the genetic purity of, but also the like cosmological stability of our universe. The people who were coming back would have to fight, and this is another meaning for the weak will perish. They would have to fight other 8472 and kill them off, so that only one can continue in existence, and the conservation of mass and energy can continue. So that was his explanation. And in that same book, actually, there is a way found for Voyager to get peace through something called the Delta Coalition, which is really cool. It's really cool. So in the book, and I'm gonna finish off in the book, and then we can go forward and whatever your thoughts about the book, because really we're trying to create something here. Just like when you're analyzing a Kantian text, you're not talking about what's so, you're talking about signified interpretive hermeneutics to make sense of what that text says in a way that's interesting, right? So with this, I'm perfectly comfortable with calling on resources outside the text that are complementary to it, secondary literature, one might say, to make sense of what we're talking about and to make it more palatable, more interesting, more valuable. So in Places of Exile, there's this scene near the end of Scorpion Part 1 where Chakotay says, hey, we don't have a way through this. We've got 8472 in the Northwest Passage, this area of space that we thought we were going to be able to go through to get through Borg space without incident. And then we've got the Borg around that passage. So, like, there's really no way to get home. I mean, okay, so there's one observation you could make here, which is why don't they go over Borg space or under Borg space?
It must just be big in 3D.
Yeah. So that's an answer. However, Chakotay, he says, well, maybe we should turn around, settle down, find a planet, sit there for a while, gather allies and stuff like this, and come back to this when we're more than one ship. And he specifically said, when I rewatched it today, he said, not every problem has an immediate solution. And so the whole book is predicated on, actually, in the book, Janeway takes like a couple minutes to consider his decision, which makes them late for their rendezvous with the Borg cube that is nearest to them that Tom Paris finds. So what happens is that Borg cube, along with everything else, gets impacted differently by the arrival of the 8472 ships. And so Voyager is maybe on the wrong side of the cube or something. And the planet gets destroyed, just like in the end of the episode, except there's massive, horrific damage done to Voyager. Tuvok is like crushed on the bridge. Tom Paris is killed, and the ship, they have to jump into escape pods. So the crew is dramatically impacted. People die, and they are rescued by this species in the Delta Quadrant. It's sort of throwaway species from early season 3. I still don't know what they look like. I didn't look that up. It didn't matter. But just different foreheads or something. And so each and every one of the characters gets integrated into Delta Quadrant life in a really, honestly, more interesting way than the rest of the show went. The Doctor decides to become an artificial superintelligence with multiple iterations of himself, multiple avatars that are doctors on different ships and everywhere else. And he, the original, integrates the memories from all of these different versions of him. And then he also incarnates as this medical instrument, so he's no longer a holographic character in some of these avatars. And then Tess's powers advance, and she becomes really powerful telepathically, except she doesn't become this etheric being. She manages to settle it down, and we find out that her encounter with fluidic space is what sparked her telepathic growth so quickly. As you find in the episode after this, and then the episode after that, Tess evolves very quickly, and then she has to leave Voyager, which she doesn't in this case. Neelix becomes this really, he's still got his TV show, and he becomes this powerful diplomat. There are, Tyler, do you remember that species of basically dinosaurs?
You have to give me more to go on.
Distant Origins. It's this episode where Chakotay is abducted by these evolved dinosaurs who are yeah, we didn't come from Earth, this planet across the galaxy. And they abduct Voyager, and they've got these really powerful transwarp engines, and somehow Voyager escapes. Anyway, in any case, there's this whole idea that there's this whole community of Delta Quadrant species. And the Voyager crew kind of gets distributed amongst these species, and one of them is the Voss, which is this transwarp-capable, really old dinosaur-like species, which claims to basically be the guardians of the Delta Quadrant. They're really powerful, and they don't really like the other species, but they kind of tolerate them. And so, long story short, in the book, we find out that the species 8472 is kind of called the Scourge. And this whole coalition, this whole group bands together to fight species 8472, and they send the Doctor camouflaged as a species 8472 into fluidic space, where he learns all of this that I just told you about them, and comes back and is okay, well, we're going to make peace with them because we understand them. We understand why they're fighting so hard, and we're going to try to help them. So all of that to say, species 8472, yes, this looks like a shitty ripoff of the Shadows from Babylon 5 when it comes to CGI in this initial episode. But there's a way of seeing them that makes them more interesting. Plus, relatively speaking, the whole weight of why they're interesting in this episode is not because they're intrinsically interesting. And it never had to be. From a narrative perspective, the whole thing that was interesting is to those who have seen the Borg, followed the conflict between the Federation and the Borg for years, starting with the Best of Both Worlds, like we have with our series, and then find out, whoa, somebody who's more powerful than the Borg, that is what makes them interesting. That is enough to make them interesting to most of the viewers. So does that kind of help you rehabilitate their characterization?
That helps. I'm reserving judgment on them.
Okay. Well, we've moved you to neutral, which is good. Much better than where we started. So, yeah, awesome. Well, yeah, I highly recommend that book in any case. And I've probably talked too much already. So what were some of your thoughts on this, Tyler? Just all of them.
Well, to say nothing of Species 8472's characterization, I mean, the very first scene of the episode was sort of really what hooked me. I'm like, this is the first time you see more than one Borg cube on screen, period. Because there's only ever one in every Star Trek episode that's ever featured the Borg before. And now there are two. And at first you're like, oh, God, what's going to happen? And they're both dispatched with relative ease. So
visually arresting. Yeah.
Yeah, that it hooked me that there was a species more powerful than the Borg. That's all it really took for me. Wanted to know more from there, at least to finish the episode. But there were some really good moments. I think Robert Picardo gets some of the best moments throughout the entire episode. Let's see, who else? Also Chakotay. I don't know. Props all around. Also to Garrett Wang for being a patient on a gurney.
Lying on a bed with gook on his face.
That's right.
I think Garrett Wang said something like, well, there had to be somebody who faced this way. I'm just kind of annoyed that I had to sit on a bed the whole time, but somebody had to do it.
Yeah. And then there are Kess's visions, because Species 8472 is, they're also telepathic in nature. They can communicate using that medium. And you get this effect that's been used in other television series to a good effect in other movies, where you see flashes of like things that are going to happen, and they do happen. There's no way to avoid them, and it's just kind of disconcerting. You're like, oh God, something's going to happen to Harry Kim, and then it happens. And I don't know how I feel about the device. Took some of the punch out of it. But seeing the organic matter sort of quote unquote eat him alive, that was pretty cool. Props to the effects on that one. I mean, it did look like some roots were just growing all over his face, but it was still pretty sickly, sickening to hear that. To hear any doctor say something like that is horrifying.
It's eating him from the inside, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's attacking him on a cellular level.
Yeah. So, I too agree with the opening sequence being kind of the hook. Like it's man. I mean, you're right. Two Borg cubes at once. That in and of itself is almost enough to like want to see the rest of the episode. Like, we're in Borg space now. Like the viewer knows it before Voyager does. Like, we're dealing with something here. So
I like that it went to the nice relaxing intro with the relaxing music right after we saw that.
I actually really like Voyager's music.
Me too. I didn't think it was appropriate for right after. I think they could have gone straight to the next scene.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. Mm-hmm. You're right. That's an interesting choice. I feel like they couldn't make it because your casual viewer needs to know what show it is.
I think it would have been rough to cut from the Borg cubes blowing up to Janeway and Leonardo on the holodeck.
Yeah, that was another thing. So they needed it in medias res. They needed this is just what's going on. Everybody thinks it's normal, and then we get the Borg capturing our probe, which that was good the way that was done. I felt like.
I also liked Leonardo was working on mechanical parts of people, which is topical.
Oh yeah, I didn't see that. Yeah. I realized that. That's really good.
That's great. Kate Mulgrew actually requested that they put Leonardo in the episode.
In this particular episode?
Well, yeah. And I believe the following one. Yeah, that's funny. The guy who played Gimli from Lord of the Rings was also offered the part without audition. So it's
yeah, because he fit it so well. He
was pretty cool. Yeah, he's perfect.
I think.
But I noticed that too. Yeah.
So there are some comments we can make about Voyager in general, but while we're on Da Vinci, I like that she chooses to sort of play a part with him. Like she's wearing her Starfleet uniform, but like she's trying to engage with the historical character, which number one says something about her, right? We find out later on that just like we see Barclay like playing out his fantasies on the holodeck, and Tom Paris doing Bride of Chaotica or whatever later, Dr. Chaotica, and I'm Captain Proton. Like I think Janeway engaging with Leonardo da Vinci, it says something about her character. She's interested in like developing herself even in her spare time with her casual recreational activities, which is probably part of what made her captain. Like, okay, I want to engage with and win over, like not by reprogramming him, but by engaging with the actual character and convincing him of Leonardo da Vinci that I deserve a bench in his shop and to learn from him. I thought that was cool. I like, let's see. Yeah, I mean, honestly, the opening sequence, the cold open, it's one of the shortest in Voyager's history. It was played, I mean, like, there was nothing there for the casual viewer. There was nothing there. I mean, like, just think of that. Just think of that. That was entirely for someone. Yeah, someone who's followed the history of Star Trek, who's maybe been watching since Next Gen. Like, this was designed for that person. Like, ooh, what is that? Otherwise it's just a couple cubes, which are just kind of really boring, honestly. Cubes. Come on. And then some menacing music. Why is there menacing music here? I don't understand. And then a laser weapon of some kind destroys one of them and interrupts them, or destroys them both. Like, I mean,
that would hook me into a new show.
That would be okay. Well, that would be okay for a modern news show, I feel like. There's a certain level of disorientation that you don't get in 90s television, that you get more recently. That, like,
I mean, I think, as you go from, like, TNG Episode 1 through Voyager and Enterprise, you can see how the show is getting more and less targeted towards, general audiences, more and more focused on people who've been watching for a while at the same time the show gets sort of uncomfortable with that fact.
Yeah, it's interesting. It is really interesting. Like, I mean, there's this perpendicularity where they're trying to play to this, and this runs through all of Star Trek, honestly, trying to play to a general audience and to be able to draw people in at the one hand, and at the other, trying to entertain, engage, and retain the audience that's been watching since the very first episode or whatever. And this kind of comes to a head, this conflict in the new Trek. The Kelvin timeline is a better term for it, because that's actually the canon title for it or whatever, which is ironic because clearly things were different in that timeline before the time travel incident with the USS Kelvin. Look at the uniforms, look at the communicators, all of it. Like, I mean, apparently even Chekhov was born in a different year or something. Anyway.
I'm waiting for the moment that they explain why it all looked that way in the first Kelvin timeline Trek film, because, there's going to be one eventually. I hope it's a good one.
You mean another one?
No, like an explanation for why that is. Apparently Chris Hemsworth.
Universe.
Yeah, Chris Hemsworth signed on, and I don't know. Yeah, it is another universe. So that's simple enough.
I kind of hope
Kirk's father.
Yeah, I hope for a Star Trek 4, so to speak.
Yeah.
But I don't know that we're going to get one. It's been a little while, and they haven't said anything. I mean, 2013 to 2016, I guess it takes 3 years. Maybe we've got time. So.
Yeah. Only time will tell about that sequel. But anyway, yeah.
But anyway, back to Voyager. I think the choreography, the pacing, those scenes of preparation were really well done. I think we've got cool phaser rifles. An interesting little note is that the pile of dead Borg that Tess sees and that our crew later encounters on the cube is actually a bunch of mangled action figures. I thought that was funny.
12 inches high.
I see. Yeah. The first act was great. As I said, everything is paced really well. So, like, there was just so much that happens in the first 7 minutes. You're just like, all right, we're in Borg space. All right, we need to figure it out. All right, they're coming after us. Oh no, my God was such a great comment, like for Chakotay to make. Let's see, when they're preparing for the Borg's arrival, we get Janeway's characteristic catchphrase, which there's a YouTube video where she says it like 27 times, which is her characteristic catchphrase is, so put it next to "Make It So" by Picard. Her catchphrase is, "Do it." I mean, like, okay. I mean, like, it's something she says. Not really. It doesn't, I mean, and then Archer later on, I think the closest we get to a catchphrase is, "Let's go." And I think he says it once.
Have you seen the Voyager supercut on YouTube where it's just some kind of a?
Yes, it's actually awesome. I think I should do that. We've got some kind of a bomb or some kind of
sorted
radiation.
Alphabetically.
Yeah, I think you can look up. It's called "Every Utterance of Some Kind of Star Trek Supercut." And for some reason, in the very first frame, it's got a picture of 7 of 9, because I guess that's what's necessary to draw people's attention into watching something of that. To have 7 of 9. But, yeah, so do it. Let's see. This is actually, honestly, I mean, the way that they needed to go in order to keep the show interesting, which was not to just have Voyager encounter the Borg, because, like, what are you going to do there? Uh-oh, there's more of them than there are of us. I guess we're screwed, and then they get screwed. Like, I mean, maybe you could have had an episode where, like, everybody gets assimilated, Voyager gets assimilated, and, like, the Doctor's the only one left or something, and somehow he's got to rescue all of them. Or maybe Tess and the Doctor. Like, that would have been interesting, I think. Like, but they didn't go that way. They were already thinking of, like, okay, well, we've had First Contact, we've had Unity, let's do something different. So I think it was quintessentially, I think the Species 8472 aspect to this episode was an invention of the writers to try to deal with the fact that there wasn't anything else really interesting for Voyager to do with the Borg.
Seems likely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like, for some reason at the end of this season, Kes just got hot. Like, I mean, she had that weird haircut for most of season 1 through 3, and she just looked kind of unappealing. And then finally she gets long hair and starts dressing similar to, but definitely not identical to the way that 7 of 9 would dress. And it's like,
yeah, the costume designers were slowly reaching for that character.
They realized that they had something on their hands.
They did. They realized that this was the way to keep the viewers.
Yeah. Now,
well, that's
sadly,
funny because she ends up leaving near the beginning of season 4, so maybe not.
She leaves and is replaced by the biggest draw of all.
So actually, it's an interesting question, like why she left the show. Apparently, they were planning on killing off Ensign Kim and bringing on 7 of 9. But Eric Wang happened to be named in People magazine's 50 Most Beautiful People.
Well, no way we're leaving him in the dust.
It was pretty surprising. And
it was all Garrett's doing. That's why the show got better. And
apparently Jennifer Leon, her contract was up. Like, she had only contracted for 3 years. So kind of boring, which is sad because she was really freaking gorgeous. I mean, like, I liked seeing her on the show. So, oh well. Yeah. But anyway, back to the episode per se. I like in one scene, actually, I think when the Borg cubes are passing by Voyager, the way that they show that the ship is getting seriously impacted, like is, of course, the characteristic shaking of the crew and the camera, but also the Voyager layout that's behind Captain Janeway. They just turn it on and off. So it's kind of like, okay, things are really serious. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's effective. For me, it was just kind of like, come on, do something more.
It could have some. Do they have these sparks?
No, but another point that we can make around this whole thing is that somehow when there are explosions on the bridge on TNG or Voyager, rocks show up. Like when you look at the debris on the floor, there are rocks, and it's like, but there weren't any rocks in the stuff. I mean, like, did the rocks get produced by the explosion? No.
Those are like drywall?
I guess. I mean, like, yeah. Oh, you mean the actual sets? The actual sets are like,
the things on the show.
I think the explosions from the energy surges, they sort of transmute whatever that's made of into, like, Earth.
Peat. It becomes peat. Or little
I liked in this was that they asked Harry Kim to just download some files from the Borg. Like, we have trouble getting different computers to talk to each other these days, and they're just going to download files from an alien intelligence.
Oh, yeah. They hadn't. I mean,
like, is there a standardized file format for all the species? Like, if so, why are the Borg on board with it?
Yeah, why wouldn't they? Well, so what's interesting about that is, number one, the point that you're making, totally true. Number two, we find out from a screen cap, basically, that the information about the Borg is classified as far as Starfleet is concerned. And I feel like that's dumb. Like, shouldn't more people know about how to deal with these things than less? Why is it just Starfleet captains getting access?
Classified.
I know.
Yeah, that information should be, like, generally distributed. Like, hey, there's a black hole in this sector. Oh, also the Borg exists.
Maybe they're worried someone would read
bad.
it, and it would. Maybe they're worried someone would read it and then think that things are really scary and then cause a panic.
I guess that might have been it.
True.
Like if it were widely known that a terrible, but then everybody knew after Wolf 359. Everybody must have known, right? I mean, there was this horrific tragedy that killed a bunch of people. Some of our friends died. So I mean, like, anyway, yeah. I like the way that Kess's telepathy introduces the Borg's problem to our crew. I like that it's kind of shards of information. What mystifies me is that most of her telepathic visions came true. However, she has premonitions of the destruction of Voyager, which of course doesn't happen in this episode. Now, in the book, in the Places of Exile, and then in kind of the exploration of what happens with Kess's character, they talk about, like, her, because there's another episode where she shifts back and forward in time called Before and After, and it's kind of implied that it's not just the chronoton torpedo from the Krenim lodged in the ship, but it's also, like, her innate telepathic abilities that allows her to do that. We find out that maybe, she kind of is able to see alternate timelines. And so that's kind of why she's special, is like, so she's seeing things that might happen, might not. I thought it was an entirely natural kind of development for her. We've seen, I know Voyager better than any of the series, really. We've seen in a previous episode or so that the Ocampa have telepathy, so it was kind of a natural thing for her to develop her abilities and to develop it on a time scale. And it's okay, I feel like, for her to happen to develop it, for them to blossom really at this stage. I mean, because it's really useful. So that was cool. Let's see. The contrast and then the references to the best of both worlds, I felt were awesome. Awesome and well done. Let me go into these, because instead of seeing in Best of Both Worlds Part 2 a graveyard of Starfleet ships destroyed by the Borg, in this one we see a graveyard of Borg ships destroyed by who knows what. Which, like, at that stage, when they find them and before they know it's 8472, it's almost making an intra-literary cosmic statement, like, oh, there's always a bigger fish, or don't think that you're the most important thing in the universe or the most powerful thing. And then, just like Picard is invaded by nanoprobes and weeps that little tear on the Borg ship in Best of Both Worlds Part 2, Harry Kim is invaded by 8472 cells, and you see him weeping a little tear. Janeway gets abducted from the bridge of Voyager, just like Picard got abducted from the bridge of the Enterprise, except here it plays out a little differently. Like the Borg, which is really interesting, they act in a very uncharacteristic way. They basically ask for the opportunity to negotiate, or they consent to her negotiation because they're so desperate. Yeah. But I felt like that was a really weird direction for them to go. So let's see. They talk about the power of imagination. Da Vinci says to seek God, whereas she seeks the devil. I thought that was great.
Yeah, that was cool.
It's kind of, it's like the scientific, the post-religious scientific rationalist making intelligent use of the text of religious thought. You can find, which is really a great argument for all atheists to read the Bible and to be cultured and exposed to literature, because there's valuable stuff in there. Those memes have lasted for thousands of years. Why do humans pass them on? Oh, because we learn things from them, just like Chakotay's parable, right? So I think the many colors in the cube, the yellow and the green, both seen externally and then also seen internally in the sets, they're a nice development for the Borg. You didn't really see it. You kind of saw it a little bit in Unity, but you didn't really see it on Next Generation, the really dramatic hues of yellow specifically. And so I like that here. I love the backdrops. This is the first and one of the few times that I think we really see dramatically, visually depicted cosmic phenomena in the background. And I thought it was a really great choice to illustrate. Borg space has this kind of reddish nebula hue thing going on in the background. We see it later with the Necrid Expanse, or we saw it earlier with the Necrid Expanse, which was this purple mass. So that was a really great use of visual details.
Yeah, it came from an image of the Orion Nebula using the Hubble telescope, and that's how they started. That's where they started with that whole thing. Eventually, put it together, to look the way it did.
So let's see. There's some really great questions for us to ask about Janeway's ethics. I think, number one, deleting the Doctor casually without him having a say, or that being even an option, right? It's the question of his intelligence and his personhood isn't really answered yet as far as the show is concerned. However,
I missed that they were planning on deleting him. I thought they were just going to delete his knowledge about the cure for the infections.
No, they were going to delete him.
Wow.
They were going to delete him and his ability to gain the knowledge.
Which he says, "You're my guarantee." Go ahead. Yeah.
I think not even exploring whether or not they considered him an individual and would have given him a say in the matter for a moment. I think the Borg would have found a way.
Yeah.
They would have assimilated enough species to eventually find a technique to fight them off. I got the impression they're very early on in dealing with this threat, species 8472. They would have found a way to deal with them by then. Just give them time. They're very patient.
Yeah.
No, very early stages. I guess Voyager was right place, right time.
Do we feel like it was legitimate for Janeway to want to delete the Doctor at this stage? I mean, I guess this takes knowledge of Voyager so far, but, like, do you think he should have been considered a person at this point?
Yeah.
I'm surprised they didn't even feel bad about it.
Yeah, you'd think that they'd have some attachment to him as a pseudo-person, even.
Well, they already had one big moral argument in this episode. They didn't have time for two.
Yeah, not enough screen time. Yeah.
That's true. So the next ethical question is it really smart, or is it just opportunistic to make an alliance with a genocidal species to fight a more genocidal species?
Fine to me.
Yeah, that sounds great. Let's do it.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Let's see. Okay, this is the last one, and this is kind of more about Star Trek, about the next episode. But is it just to take a free person away from their community and foist a different type of personhood upon them? And this is basically what happens with 7 of 9. And we get this argument articulated really well in The Gift, and we can talk about it more there. But is it just, like 7 of 9 knows nothing at this point. She is not Annika Hansen. She hasn't known herself to be that for 20 years, and she doesn't really want to be. She's got no desire to be. And so Janeway plucks her from the Borg collective, tells her, hey, you're really human, and that was stolen from you, so you deserve it back. And 7 of 9's like, hell no, let me go back. I liked it there. I want to continue. And Janeway's like, yeah, when you have enough of individuality to make that decision for yourself, I'll let you make that decision for yourself. But I don't think you've got enough. And so it makes Janeway into this kind of arbiter of, like, what it means to be a person and, like, an individual. And so that's kind of jumping the gun, because that's a question for a later episode.
I think we'll have plenty to discuss about that next time.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's for another, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll just let that sit. Janeway says, then I guess I am alone. And I think she's looking for more support and empathy than in someone understanding that she can make a kind of choice like she does, rather than like explicit support for her decisions. Like I think she wants Chakotay to understand and to feel where she's at, more than she wants him to explicitly change his opinion and say, yes, you're right, which makes him kind of a dick when he says, you're the captain. It's just like, well, no. And I guess this is, you're one captain alone in a new quadrant, doing the best that you can to get your crew home. I think he could have done much better than he did. And, yeah, so.
I think he felt too strongly.
He could have done better he wouldn't have been authentic to himself, though, if he had done that.
Yeah, exactly. He realized, I feel too strongly about this not to make a stand on this issue. And
yeah, it's really kind of
happened to be in opposition to Janeway's plan, so.
Yeah. I feel like this was also an opportunity for the writers to say, hey, we really want some sort of dramatic philosophical perpendicularity to how things have been going, and maybe a shakeup of the whole show, which is kind of sad that they didn't follow it up, because, I know from the writing of Christopher Bennett what could have happened if they had shaken things up in that way. At the end of that novel, by the way, the Delta Coalition petitions to join the Federation, which is really cool. Like, you have this whole alliance of different species from the Delta Quadrant that is now joining into a truly interstellar alliance. And here you just kind of, in Voyager, you have Voyager kind of like making friends every now and then, but mostly just like walking through the Delta Quadrant, trying to get home. So the impact of Voyager could have been much better than it was. But anyway, yeah, they tried to set up a divergent position. Like, should we try to get home or should we wait? Like, should we just spend our time doing something different for now? And yeah, so it could have been more interesting. Anyway, what do the rest of you guys' thoughts? I'm out of notes.
I wonder why would the Borg really try to assimilate and attack Voyager, just this one tiny ship that's going through their space? Aren't they more interested in whole species and not just one little ship?
Yeah, they always talk about, like, if you lower your phasers, they won't consider you a threat. So, like, if Voyager's not trying to mess with them, maybe they could have done that. Maybe that could have been their plan.
Just to sort of tiptoe through. Gun ports closed.
Because we know what happens on the fire when it's midnight on the firing line and your gun ports are open.
Yeah. Different series, guys. Anyway, Babylon 5.
Different
good show.
series.
Watch it. But yeah.
Good show. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. That might have happened. I don't know. I feel torn about that. 50-50. Because they've shown that they don't consider, they assimilate species as a whole. That's their goal. They try to ignore individuals like stray people or stray species just wandering around, not really knowing what's going on. But I feel like they would have assimilated everything. I mean everything. Doesn't matter who, doesn't matter what, doesn't matter where. Like just individual people walking around, sure. Like, we don't consider you a threat, and we'll get to you later. That's what I always think every time anyone is ever ignored when they're walking among a hive of bored drones just walking about the ship. Like, we're doing something right now, but we'll file you away for later. Yeah.
We'll get to you.
Please call back and try again. Yeah. Like, we're busy right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Like they would have eventually just like, it's Federation ship, get it.
Yeah, because there are resources and technology and, individual experiences that could be valuable. I mean, like, they're not going to neglect opportunities like that. They didn't neglect the opportunity of the Enterprise D when they first encountered them.
No, indeed.
I mean, at least in following them.
Yeah. Plus, you take the threat of the species 8472, and all of a sudden, hey, we could be dangerously close to running out of resources for once.
You're great, man. You just highlighted a really interesting thing about the Borg, which is what are their standard operating procedures, and how do they organize them, and how do they relate to them? Like, we know they want to assimilate people and technology. We know that they have objectives that they consider probably higher than assimilating just anybody. We know that they don't assimilate certain species because they don't consider them worthy of assimilation. Now, and so we know their main mission, but what is the dynamics underneath that? What is the dynamics inside of that? Like, what are they usually trying to do? Optimize the use of available resources? Probably. Including, and maybe that's the guiding principle behind giving people bionic arms and eyes is like, okay, well, and we hear that from the Borg Queen throughout First Contact, and then 7 of 9 when she talks about the Omega particle on Voyager, like the Borg aspire to perfection. What does that even mean? How can you even have that? What a strange philosophical concept, perfection. Just like flat out distinct perfection. You can have perfection of like a water bottle, maybe, or like a perfect moment, or like a perfect partner. But that's always because you have a very specific set of criteria for distinguishing what perfection is. And
or
like
perfect geometrical shape.
Yeah, I mean,
in their case.
Well, what's interesting is theirs aren't. Like when you look at the fine-grained detailed sides of the core, I guess. I mean, they're closer to it than like some other shape of ship. I mean, how would you ever attain that? Like, what would that? I mean, she says later on, I think, 7 of 9 says that species 8472 was as close to biological perfection as they could find, which I think has to do with the universe that 8472 comes from. It's like unique in its biosphere, in its ecosystem, which according to the Bennett book, the whole of fluidic space is one ecosystem. And it's the delicate balance of that ecosystem getting upset, as I think I've said already, that makes them so pissed off, because their whole job is to cultivate that ecosystem and to care for it. And so I guess that's what makes the 8472 interesting. But like, how do they judge the value, the ultimate value of biological organisms? Like, why are they even necessary? Why are they not, as one of their objectives, trying to develop something more like data? Because we know in First Contact they like data. They're like, yeah, you'll be included. And we know from at least the receptivity of the Borg in Descent Part 2 that to Lore's message, that maybe that's a kind of philosophical tension underlying what's going on in the Borg mindset is like, yeah, eventually we'll do away with this organic stuff once we've developed a way to do that and become mostly artificial. And you see this in the Borg Queen. The Borg Queen is mostly artificial. She's the fundamental nature of the Borg Queen is she's a program, according to Voyager. There's the Queen protocol, number one. So she's not even physical. Number two, when she does manifest physically, what we see is this spinal column and this Terminator-like head coming down from the ceiling into a body that's entirely fabricated, we've distinguished, in order to seduce Data. So, I think it's reasonable to question why they spend so much time pursuing assimilation when they've already identified non-physical kind of artificial, either non-physical, like the omega particles, not quite physical, honestly, or artificial existence as closer to perfection. Thoughts?
I think they might. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I think they need a software update. Also hardware. I think it's been a while.
Well, you also have to consider what Picard said or what Locutus said in Best of Both Worlds Part 2. We only wish to raise quality of life.
Maybe their philosophy is ultimately incoherent because it was written by multiple writers.
They're doing what feels good to them and what raises their quality of life, and they've managed to get into some kind of evolutionary, bad feedback cycle where all that's left is just growth, like a cancer. It's the only incentive remaining. At least that's how I've always seen them.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's almost as if it's like an instinct. The system is, it's out of control. Yeah. And it's been out of control for a very long time.
Pretty much anything people do is in order at some level to attain perfection along some dimension, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know what theirs is, but
maybe they found their definition.
I think Unity was one of the more interesting episodes of them, because that's where you get the sense that maybe they started off as a nice community, and then just all the incentives went away, and all that was left was the growth.
Huh. Well,
I don't think the Borg are happy.
I think they are, largely. That was the experience of just look at Chakotay and what's her name, the blonde girl from Unity. They're pretty happy being connected. Now, it's unclear whether or not there's so much freedom of exploration and mutual experience as they had right there. It occurs to me that if each of us had some measure of that kind of experience of empathic exploration of memories and sensations, etc., of other people, we would all be better off as a species. Now, the extent to which we should be engaged in that rather than individual experiences in question, and it's highlighted by the fact that we don't want it all taken away. We don't want to be completely together. I think the Borg did start off happy, and this becomes a question of what their programming is, how it works, because they as you say, Richard, they developed this kind of cancerous desire to grow. But I think the desire to grow probably emerged out of, the question is which came first. It probably emerged out of their desire for perfection. And species 8472, that's thousands of species they've investigated and codified and tallied in their search for perfection. So I think their search for perfection came first and determined their desire for assimilation. And further, I think that it might have been some sort of, this is another explanation that's proposed, is maybe they were looking for perfection of biological existence. They were sick, and the only way to manage that was nanoprobes, and the nanoprobes developed in some way that was all right, instead of heal all illness, heal all illness came to mean heal the illness of being a biological organism through augmentation.
This is why they're fun. They're like you can see them as a trajectory that as really far along a trajectory that the Federation is going down, or that we in actual the human world are going down, and it doesn't look so good when you get that far.
Technology going wrong. Yeah.
Well, so as a note on that, we know that people who play tennis, for example, the more they interact with their tennis racket, the more well-developed is the circuitry for interfacing with that piece of technology. And in their brain, it gets represented more intricately, more robustly. So we are each doing this every time we pick up a cell phone or turn on a computer or interact with Facebook. We're developing in reciprocal relationship in a feedback loop with technology. And so the Borg dramatize and take to its sort of limit this interface with technology, this whole idea that, maybe we shouldn't interface quite as often or quite as unconsciously with the technology that we are. Like, because maybe this will result. Maybe we'll become a cancerous pock upon the face of society galactically or something. That was just fun to say. That wasn't really what I think they're proposing philosophically, I think. It's a far subtler thing. It's interesting to try to tease out a philosophical underpinning or understanding to the Borg, considering it may be the case that merely the divergent writers had their own ideas. Maurice Hurley, Brandon Braga, whoever the writers were for this episode, which were assuredly different ones. It's an issue with all of Star Trek, really. How to tease something coherent out of what might be incoherent by the way that it was written. And just as an example of this, there's a book. It's really good. It's by Manu Sadia, I don't know, Jewish author actually, who examines the economics of Star Trek. It's called Trekonomics. And he talks about how, in the original series they talk about people being paid and using credits for things. And then in Star Trek 4 you get talk of suddenly there's no money in the past. There's no money in the future. And from then on, it was just there's no money in the Federation, and it operates somewhat differently. And then in the 6th season of Deep Space Nine, you get this one offhand comment of Jake Sisko saying to Quark, I sold my book to the Federation. And Quark's like, how much did it cost? And he's like, it's just a figure of speech. And so you can go back and say, okay, anytime they're talking about credits or Scotty, you just won your pay for the week, it's this reinterpretation. So, it's fun, and it's an interesting intellectual game, I think, to try to piece it together. It's like a puzzle that wasn't meant to be a puzzle, which is why we kind of strain credibility sometimes to make it all fit together. So this is just articulating part of what it means to be a Star Trek fan, like a really hardcore fan. You're trying to understand it all. You're trying to make sense of it all, and that in itself is fun. And I think Star Trek is designed for that kind of play, that kind of engagement, because a lot of the themes and a lot of the social commentary and the science and the philosophy behind it, they're all really interesting. And they're going to draw a certain type of person who's going to try to make sense of it in this way. So hopefully you guys aren't too pissed at me talking so much this time. I feel like I got some fun things to say.
No, we enjoy you.
That's good. Cool.
I'm real angry about it.
Yeah, you're not. I can tell.
Now that I think about it, I'm enraged.
I can tell you're not. So
give it a minute.
Let's see. What are you guys' final thoughts? I think it's a 9 out of 10. I think it's that good. I think it was entertaining. I loved it. I've always loved it.
Yeah, I'm not up to a 9 yet. We'll see how it goes with the further developments into part 2.
Oh, well, I would say, go ahead.
Sorry.
I would say this is the cliffhanger syndrome. Every first episode, usually the first ones are better than the second one. So you can hope. We can hope.
I'll keep hoping.
Yeah, all right. As an isolated sort of separate entity from its conclusion, I would say I give it an 8 because there's a lot of elements from previous Trek series that excite viewers, make them real fired up, give them energy to stay invested, if only in the episode, if not in the entire series itself. But yeah, give it an 8.
I think it's worthwhile, just in a completely random thing, to talk about the legal problems that Jennifer Leon has faced in her history.
Who?
Oh.
Jennifer Leon, the one who played Kes. I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
We'll conclude on that. Because this is her last episode, so we should acknowledge her in some way.
As a regular cast member. She does appear later, but yeah.
Yeah, she appears later. So on July 3rd, 2012, she was arrested for domestic violence, which is kind of interesting. It's funny to think of her, like, beating up her husband.
Like, I was Kes. I was a telepathic god.
She kind of, like, I mean, later on, after she left Voyager, like, her life degraded, I'd say. Although Voyager ended in 2011, so it was much later. But in 2015, she was arrested for evading arrest, resisting arrest, reckless endangerment, and aggravated assault after attempting to flee police. We don't know why she was fleeing the police. Maybe she was just paranoid. Yeah. So, and then finally, she was arrested again on September 3rd, 2015, outside her home for exposing her breasts and buttocks to young children during an altercation. During an altercation in which she confronted some children that were in her front yard. When arrested, she threatened the officers that arrested her and had to be physically carried to the patrol car. Oh man,
sounds like a telepathy crazy.
Well, yeah, she was pretty crazy apparently. Yeah. Anyway, I thought she was really attractive until just now. Definitely not anymore. I see.
She's
crazy ones.
She's pretty. I think. I don't know. She had talent and promise.
Oh my God, she looked so profoundly ugly later. When she was arrested, she like shaved her head, changed her hair color, and got fat. She looks like a man.
Damn, that's harsh.
Well, on that note,
I mean, hopefully that was her prep. Hopefully she really wanted to look that way. Maybe she was hoping that she looked different for some reason. I don't know. Yeah. On that note, not the best note to end on, but Scorpion was a good episode. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We will see you on the next episode when we talk about Scorpion Part 2. Good luck. Good luck. All right. Bye-bye.